It's the BCS Podcast.
Hello and welcome once again to the BCS Podcast. This week we are going to look at the recent gambling scandal that has overshadowed the start of the latest NBA season. For those who aren't aware, on the 23rd of October, the FBI made over 30 arrests across 11 states tied to multiple gambling schemes. Most noteworthy of these, the current head coach of the Portland Trailblazers, Basketball Hall of Famer Chauncey Billups, as well as former NBA player Damon Jones, are alleged to have been involved in a high-stakes poker game that used high-tech cheating equipment and is alleged to have defrauded victims out of millions of dollars. Separately, the Miami Heat guard Terry Rozier is alleged to have given inside information to friends of his regarding his performance in a game while he was playing for the Charlotte Hornets, which resulted in his friends making over $200,000 worth of bets on that game. I have talked about the dangers of sports gambling in the past on this show. You may remember that I spoke to my colleague and the co-host of the Backflips and Nerds podcast, Russell Eassom, about his gambling addiction. And as much as these allegations aren't about gambling addiction, it's part of the wider dangers of sports betting. And so it's worth revisiting that chat with Russell. Here is what he had to say about his gambling addiction, how it started, and what he thinks needs to be done.
What was your relationship with sports gambling?
Yeah, so I think I am the perfect age for like the boom of what was sports gambling like in the UK. I am at the time of recording 35. So effectively like I hit my teenage years just when like sports gambling was still something you had to go to the bookies to do. So you would, if you wanted to put a bet on, I remember I talked to my dad and he would bet on like the Grand National like once a year. And I knew that he had to go to a bookies to do this and he'd ask us like when we were a bit younger or like pick a random horse name or whatever. And that was very much like my idea of like sports gambling when I grew up. When I started to hit like 17, 18, I started to go to the pub and watch games. There was a Ladbrokes right next to the pub that I would go to. And the Ladbrokes itself would even put like the betting sheets in the pub with like the red pens, the little red pens to get you to do those sorts of things. And at that point, like, yeah, had some part-time jobs or whatever. We would watch the football and it would be fun to put a bet on, like to be like, well, I think this is going to happen. I'm going to go watch the game. So let's put something on the result or put something on a score or a first goal scorer. Like, I don't know. I was probably spending maybe like 10, 20 pounds a weekend. Nothing. It's nothing to even cry about. Obviously, back then it was maybe like 3 or 4 hours of minimum wage as it used to be back then. But it was anything. It was just kind of like what it was. But what kind of grew after that, and I think what grew like really strong was like that was then the time that we all got to know bet in play, where it became the concept of smartphones just blew up. So you then got to the point where you could very easily not have to go next door and put a bet on to do that. You could use your smartphone and you could place a bet on while you were sat down in the pub while you're watching something in front of you. And to me, like that very much that kind of in-play betting, that spot betting is what really kind of drew me in because I was like, I'm watching something. I class myself as an intelligent person, and there are times where I think that I know more than other people. It is an arrogance, I 100% admit, but like I do class myself as that. So I was watching sport sometimes being like, nah, those odds are wrong. Like, I'm gonna do that, and for a reasonable amount of time, probably for like the first couple of years, going to like university and watching games with friends, I'd just go watch games and bet while I was like watching games. Nothing really kind of like to write home about. But when you are at university and at times you have a lot of downtime.
Exactly, yes, I agree.
At times, well, the choice of whether you actually choose to go to your lectures or not is another thing, but you can have lots of downtime. And that's when I started to be like, oh, I think, as I said, I think I'm smarter than other people. I started to kind of like really look into like sports analytics, really started to kind of pick up that side of what is stuff I kind of like my day job now. It's like I do data science work, I do all these sorts of things. Actually, I think I learned more about that from kind of like looking into statistics for sports betting than I ever actually did like at university. But what that did is it gave me this confidence that I knew better than like the market.
Hmm.
And I
Okay.
would then start to bet, and for a while did okay. Spent a lot of time doing it. Realized that I was basically not really actually earning minimum wage from the amount of time that I was spending kind of like
Hmm.
researching all of these sorts of things. And so to kind of think about that, I then got to the point where I was like, well, if I want to actually make money, I got to spend more money and I've got to do things that are riskier to
Hmm.
kind of do this. And it just from that sort of moment, it just like it slowly escalated. I very much like to look at things like watching in-play football. I built odds basically around like if someone's 2-0 up with like 5 minutes to go, like it's like less than a 1% chance in like European leagues that the team comes back and gets a draw out of the game. So
Okay.
I'd look at basically the odds, bet in play, find games that were had like 5 minutes to go, someone 2-0 up, and just put it on the winner. So these are always like lots of like short odds. And we just do it and do it and do it. And yeah, I did okay. But the first kind of step in when I realized that things weren't quite right is that I was disassociating like money from what I was doing. Me and my friends would talk about it in the concept of like, oh, how many eggs did you bet on the game yesterday?
Hmm.
Which
Okay.
is like it's a weird thing to kind of talk about, but that disassociation from like actually thinking like you're spending money to just kind of like you're using just an arbitrary thing to describe it, it loses like you don't then think about like what the impact is.
Okay, so talk to me. Right. So I'll be very upfront and honest here. Like, I've only ever placed two bets in my life. One was on the results of who was going to win the 2006 World Cup, FIFA World Cup, and men's edition, and the other was who was going to win the 2018 men's FIFA World Cup, and I won both of those bets. That never encouraged me to bet more. I never thought, oh, okay, I've won, so I'm going to bet again. Like, so, and if this is true of me, I'm going to assume it's going to be true of some people, at least some people who are listening to this. What is going on in your mind that was making you say, right, let's keep betting, even though you haven't had success? Like, because back to me, I can't quite understand. So what's going through your mind in that situation?
Yeah, I think there's like a bit of like the gambler's fallacy when you're committed or pot committed, so you're kind of then you just throw more at it to try and kind of like make sure that you kind of get back your losses by kind of like betting more. I think other sides of it is it still comes down to my upbringing. I went to a grammar school. I had the smoke blown up my ass that like we are like you're amazing, you're intelligent or whatever, and I believed it. And I believed that I was better than. And for a while, you take losses, and I'd be like, nah, the system's right. It's just going to take time for it to kind of kick through. If you think about it from a baseball perspective, I'm like, no, my swing is true. I'm just not getting the outcomes that
Sure.
like we kind of will work. But the system will work. We'll continue on it. Like the system like will work. And then yeah, it got to the point where yeah, the system wasn't working. Like I wasn't losing like ridiculous amounts of money, but I was getting to the point where even like at university, we'd go on a night out and I'd be like, can you spot us a tenner?
Okay.
Not
So
to be like I was struggling to pay rent or anything like that, but it got to that point where I was like, I didn't have the disposable income. I was using all of my disposable income or more of my disposable income to actually like bet.
okay. So I suppose the question has to be when did it become a problem for you? When were you not only spending your disposable income?
Yeah, so I think that was probably to me as like my final year at university where you definitely have a lot of spare time. You have a massive project that you're kind of supposed to kind of do and work on.
Mm.
And if I'm perfectly honest, I smashed that and I had basically so much free time to to do on this. I was playing online poker. I was uh like using that to kind of make a bit of money here and then, basically sports betting all the time. And so it got to the point where, yeah, like I was just using up my entire day to do this. And when I'd go out, I'd be like, man, I don't actually have any money. And all my friends would be like, what are you doing, Russell? Like you talk all the time about like your betting wins or whatever, and you're chatting S to all the time about every time that like a good result comes in, but you're saying you got no money. And that was the point. It didn't hit me then. It hit me like probably a couple of months later, where I was still trimming that kind of that line where I was like, I was just below like returns on my money, and so just losing like a small amount each week and each week and each week. But when I'm saying losing a small amount, I'm losing like 20-30 quid a week, but I'm betting like £1,000 worth of stuff in that week. So
Oh
because
wow,
like
okay.
how much betting I'm doing like within a time period, I'm betting a lot of money, but like they're losing like a very like small amount, like taking almost like 47% like winnage like on that,
Hmm.
almost effectively like betting on red on a roulette table like that whole entire time, just taking like that small loss and small loss and small loss, but thinking like I was going to do well. And it got to one point where, yeah, I just have to say, like, I have a friend, Giuseppe at university, who was somebody that I used to bet with quite a lot. We used to discuss about these sorts of things, and he kind of got to the point where he was just like, Russell, I think you actually have a problem here.
Hmm.
Like, and to come from him, like I think other people had said it to me before, but I hadn't quite taken notice because once again, it's still a little bit of arrogance. But like, then no, you don't understand it. Like these are all the things. But I was like, Giuseppe understood it. Like,
Hmm.
and he was like, no, mate, like you're not doing this for fun. You're not doing this with like a system that's actually like making you money. You're just slowly losing money. And yeah, we had a heart to heart. We had a conversation, and it was kind of like, yeah, I don't think this is any good.
Yeah, and that's the thing that made you stop, is it? Is that friend intervening on,
Yeah,
on your behalf?
pretty much. Like, I think I know I had a addictive like personality. Like when I play like video games, new video games that come out, I will play that video game for like 60 hours and then be done with it. But I have that like idea of mentality of like when I get into something, I get into something. But then I'm quite lucky that I also like as soon as I actually realized that, wasn't too far along, kind of like being too far in, if that makes sense. I was capable enough of still kind of going, actually, yes, you know what, like we've had this discussion. This isn't a good place. Deleted like the apps off my phone, deleted like the things off my kind of off my computer, and I was like Peppy, if you hear me talking about placing a bet, and to three or four of my other close friends, like you hear me talking about placing a bet, come and slap me up the face, okay? Like, and yeah, it felt like I didn't know what to do with my time for a good month or so. I was like, what do I actually kind of like do now? And it then felt, which is kind of how we get probably into like my baseball story, is that
Exactly.
I
Yes.
couldn't watch sport in the UK almost
Hmm.
because every time I watched a football match, it was one plastered all over the shirts, all the betting
Hmm.
sponsors, plastered all over the advertising hordes, and then at
Yeah.
halftime, pre-game, even post-game sometime for the next game, it was like Roy Winston going, "Bet in play. You got to bet on this. Bet on the number of corners. Bet on the number of red cards. Bet on how many guys are gonna kind of like get a goal in this game." And it was like I couldn't watch British sport without that kind of being pushed into my mind, and I wanted to
Hmm.
kind of go as cold turkey on it as possible. I didn't want to give myself any kind of like inroads into going back into it. And so I was like, I love sport, but I can't really watch football now in the UK. Rugby and cricket weren't as bad. There were still definite elements to it. Obviously, we can talk about spot fixing and talking a little bit later on of what the consequences are of like betting. But yeah, it was, and that gave me like this time to be like, I want to watch some other sport. And yeah, that I actually found a safe haven in baseball.
This gambling addiction is something. is an issue that you always have.
Mm.
I believe. Like, how do you keep yourself in check now that we are now years down the line?
Yeah, so I think what I do is like the part of it, like as I still said, was part of me thinking that I was smarter than the system.
Sure.
So like I get that fix in other places. So actually playing fantasy sports is something that kind of like helps me with that because it is a place where you kind of like you're doing something fairly similar to betting, but you're well depending like I don't know. Yeah, there are a couple of leagues that I will spend 20, 30 pounds or whatever to play to be part of, so we can have a trophy, we can have something worthwhile for winning. But it's like that helped me kind of get that fix that I was kind of like was looking to or what I was driving towards in some regards. So, but and otherwise, it's like yeah, it is. I've noticed over the time because we're now talking like 12 plus years since kind of there. I know like when I'm kind of like when my personality kind of like ticks in. Like I know when it's kind of like, oh, like hey, like this is a like you're thinking about this, kind of like yeah, let's maybe like not do that, or like I have bet since then. I'm not gone like completely cold turkey afterwards because I feel like I have control of what I would like myself because I've learned kind of like I've been to therapy, I've been to for other things to kind of work out to understand my own ticks to work out where these things are coming, where these bad repetitive behaviors come from. And so I know that now and it means that like I can interact adjacently to kind of like that world and not get pulled in. Like I still like have like I don't have like any betting accounts anymore. Like with like the British like betting account sites things, you can actually send something to them to basically say like don't let me sign up.
Yes.
So like these are like good things they put in place. The fact that these systems kind of have to exist is isn't great, but like it is something you can do. So basically like my name is like I can't basically sign up for a British betting account. So it's like they just did that to kind of like to really be like a fairly kind of like simple way of kind of like really just cutting myself off.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Well, great. And I should say I will also be including information on those kind of organisations, like the the organisations that allow you to set GamStop, for example, so that you can get yourself onto those registers that Russell mentions. I'll be including details of those in the description of this episode as well. So please do go to those links if you have any issues or if you would like to find out more.
And here is what Russell had to say about how he thinks sports gambling addiction will develop across the United States now that sports betting has been legalised more broadly across all of the United States.
You mentioned that you started to follow American sports because of the absence of betting, and betting is certainly something that has become a lot more prevalent in American sports. I can't watch an NBA game or an NFL game or an MLB game without seeing numerous commercials for betting. So how has that affected you? Like, are you able to enjoy American sports now, or is that something where you think you might need to step away from American sports as well now?
I think I'm in a good enough place that like it doesn't. I don't think I'm ever gonna like have to be forced to step away. But what I see is that I can just see what happened to me happening to other people, and that kind of unnerves me from that respect. Not necessarily that it's going to happen to me again. As you talked about, like the ease of being able to do these sorts of things and it being so actively promoted is just going to get people to make those first bets. And some people don't have an addictive personality. Probably a good 80-90% of people who actually do sports betting keep it perfectly under and reasonable amounts. But I don't think that industries or things should exist that are like okay for 90% of people if it's bad for like 10% of people.
Sure.
Like,
Okay.
and
So please go on.
Yeah, and so I think that's what you get into this kind of like you get the weird, I get this weird aspect where almost like I can see like it's a lot of the time it's pre-game, so I avoid a lot of like the pre-game talk because they're usually talking about I bet on like kind of what's going to happen today. I think in-game I don't know what it's like for NBA because I don't watch too much of that nowadays. But NFL, you just watch Red Zone, so you don't really get. I watch Red Zone apart from maybe the
Okay.
times that I watch Cleveland, so it doesn't really impact that because that's was it 7 hours of commercial-free entertainment, as Scott Henson says. But yeah, in MLB, it has got to that point where it is noticeable. Like you'll
Mm.
start to see it's kind of replaced like we used to have advert breaks, and then we used to have like the in-game advert like pop-up. And I feel that like the in-game advert pop-up is now being replaced with here's the betting odds on something, and you can use Bally Sports, or you can use us
Mm.
like DraftKings, the official sponsor of MLB, or the official sponsor of the Cleveland Guardians, or yeah. So all of the teams in the leagues now have like official sport books,
Mm.
which all of this is doing is just making it easier for people to bet, which then just makes it easier for people to get it to lose control.
Yeah, and it should be said, but we are starting to see the effects of this as well, aren't we? I think certainly when it comes to baseball, the most prominent example is that Shohei Ohtani and his interpreter, or ex-interpreter now, have been implicated in a scandal, and it should be said that MLB is investigating that, and so we can't really comment on that while the investigation is going on place. But in the NBA as well, Jonte Porter, who is on a two-way contract with the Toronto Raptors, is also under investigation by his league for supposed infractions. And so if this is happening to the players, then we can only imagine what may or may not be happening to the people who are watching the sports as well.
Yeah, I think that no, I don't. People aren't really going to try and throw games for money anymore. It's just not worth their time and effort to kind of like to do that. There's so much checking involved in kind of like suspicious results.
Mm.
I don't know how much you're aware of kind of lower level tennis. Was a problem like especially in the last like 5 to 10 years, probably like 5 to 10 years ago, with kind of matches in the kind of like these ATP 100 level, which is like the 500 to 1,000 best people. That suspicious amounts of betting happening on certain games and results going one way or another. Well, they scaled back to instead of like doing results, they got to the point where like they would be betting on a certain number of double faults happening or a certain
Mm.
number of like specific things happening in a game. So we call it like spot bets, or I think
Yes.
Americans call it like prop bets.
Mm.
And so these individual moments that don't necessarily affect a game's outcome, people can very be easily influenced to do this because
Mm.
a lot of people who play sport aren't paid a lot of money. The people who are working hard to kind of reach that top level in tennis, they're not paid a lot. In obviously in NBA and in baseball, the people that we're talking about, yes, can make a bit of money, but baseball, we have the minor league baseball, which there's a lot of people that don't get paid. In college,
Mm.
there was issues last year, I think, around some coaches being involved in potentially kind of like shaving like results or changing like over and under lines by benching players like during the game because that's something they have control of.
Mm.
So like it just allows people to be influenced by gambling. And it's not only just the seedy side of it when I'm talking about like maybe like organized crime or that side of it. It affects people who just then are also the bystander who just wants to kind of like to bet on something and just slowly kind of goes out of control. So yeah, it gets into a really dangerous kind of minefield where people talk about, well, how do you do this safely?
Yeah,
And
and I think you've hit on a very good point here. Is to your mind, do you think that is where the issue is in the spot betting, the prop betting aspects of it? Because it's not affecting the end result, but there is a lot of money that can be bet on those spots or on those props, and it should be said that is the allegation against Jonte Porter in the NBA, is that he was he was fixing spots allegedly. So
Yeah,
like,
I think how the leagues are going to be impacted, our players are going to be willing to do that. Like, because they're going to, I'm not throwing a game, or like probably when you get to the level where you can throw a game, they're probably already earning tens of millions, so they're not going to throw a game. The stuff that's against Otani, no idea, like whether it is him or whether it was whether it was Ipe. That just seems to be a vast swathes amounts of money bet the old-fashioned way through a back end like bookie, which is just it's a very old school kind of gambling thing. It's not like the modern kind of issue we've had with gambling. So I think how the leagues are going to get in trouble with gambling is prop bets and players
and
getting involved in this.
And it should be said that part of the issue with Otani and his now ex-interpreter is partly because gambling is illegal in California, not necessarily that gambling was taking place, because in the MLB they do allow players to bet on other sports, just not on baseball itself.
Yeah, and it's more specifically with the Otani one, I think California does now allow betting, but what it doesn't allow is like you have to pay up front. And so effectively the side of what it was seemingly with the fact of what the federal government found is that like these back payments were being paid like after kind of like betting debt had been raised, which is like a whole way of kind of like a whole different kettle of fish in how these sorts of things work. So yeah, the leagues have opened themselves up for people to question their integrity. And
what do you think the solution is ultimately? Because this is something I should have raised earlier, but like I strongly encourage people to go to the website and to read Russell's article in full. But there are two stats in the article that Russell wrote, and I know that these are to be true because I'm the one that went and made sure that they were true on Russell's behalf before we published the article. The economic cost to the British government associated with harmful gambling is equivalent to a roughly 413 million. However, the government makes approximately 3.5 billion in tax from gambling in the UK. And so for you, what is the solution? Because clearly there is a financial incentive for the government to allow gambling to continue. And if that's true in the UK, it's also going to be true in the US as well.
Yeah, and frankly, there's no government that's going to say no. Like you're basically killing your tax budget to do this. So while basically we do not have any massively left-leaning government that has existed in a major country, I don't think anybody's going to do anything about gambling apart from set up the systems to help the people who have got too involved in gambling. And I think what you're seeing maybe in the UK a little bit is removing the prevalence of some of the uber in-your-face sponsorships. So I think the Football League which is not the Premier League, but like the English Football League, the leagues below, are removing gambling teams from being allowed to like sponsor teams. Premier League has discussed this, not really kind of got into it yet, but we've seen kind of these things change in recent. Teams seem to be moving away from those sorts of deals. So I think you might see in English sport that the prevalence of these kind of gambling massively in your face may decline, but the ability to easily bet is not going away. I think they're just trying to say that like, oh, it's not as in your face, so people aren't going to kind of get brought into that world like straight away or easier than they were done beforehand. So that's like what we see in the UK. In the US, they're like at the start of this wave. Like we're talking 20 years in the UK since these sorts of things started to happen and become like a massive problem. Like I don't see much happening in the US for a long time over this. Like I think the sports, if we talk from a baseball perspective, there is potentially a revenue issue right now because they are all talking around losing their like local network like deals around television broadcasting deals. So there's been like
that is specifically prevalent and a concern with a network called Diamond, I believe.
Yep, so they took over, so Diamond and which kind of have like the Bally Sports, quite a lot of those stuff I run through. Like they took over a load of the contracts and then basically kind of defaulted on a few of them being like, yeah, this isn't going to make us money, so we're just going to opt out of the contracts. Obviously, still pay a huge kind of like cost, but effectively be like, we're not going to sink this cost for months coming. And so teams are looking for different ways to generate revenue, and a nice juicy uh finance deal or a corporate deal from a sponsor, a gambling sponsor, is gonna light up their eyes. Like
Hmm.
we saw the way that the league has interpreted these sorts of things. Like, just not go into it too far, but hey, FTX was all over a lot of the stuff, obviously from a failed cryptocurrency market. So
Yep.
the league and the teams want whatever revenue they can possibly get and whatever guaranteed revenue they can possibly get right now. So they're not going to turn away gambling money. It's
Hmm.
going to be, we have to basically have either a super serious issue, i.e., Shohei Ohtani was betting on like major league things, and maybe sometimes like when he had an injury and he left early with a blister, there was money on the line. I don't think I will preface this,
Yeah.
but
Let's let.
I don't think that is the case, and I don't think that is the case because the suspicious betting pattern would have been around those sorts of things would have already been picked up if there were suspicious betting patterns around kind of what it is. But if something of that scale were to happen, it would make the sports have to kind of reconsider like their arrangement with these industries. But right now, it's kind of like the current cash cow, and sadly, that's what talks to sports owners and to sports leagues. So there isn't much that we can kind of, as fans, that we can really do in the interim.
And so there you have it. Russell is neither a fortune teller nor a soothsayer, and yet a lot of what he predicted would happen has happened. This is because we in the UK know the harms associated with sports betting, and Russell is very much at the lower end of the scale in terms of the harm that sports betting and the addiction that can be associated with it has had on him. Thankfully, he was able to catch that addiction with the help of his friends, and he's now monitoring that on an ongoing basis to make sure that he doesn't regress. The fact that the UK sports betting industry is worth about £4 billion a year should speak volumes, because of course if you are going to take sports betting over to the US and legalise it more broadly, then that is going to be an even bigger industry because it's a much bigger country and sports are very much more at the heart of American society. We as a society have to recognise these harms and start to regulate for them. We have heavily regulated the gambling industry in the UK, and yet the harm continues to happen because an addict is an addict is an addict. It's all well and good putting "please gamble responsibly" at the end of your sports betting advert. It's all well and good someone like Kurt Warner saying in an advert, "don't chase your losses." A gambling addict is still going to continue to gamble regardless of what you say in an advert, and we need to protect those people. I know that is very much against certain Americans' view of freedom, but freedom is a very interesting concept when it comes to advertising to addicts who are predisposed to do irresponsible things. At some point, as much as that person has to be free, you also need to protect them by regulating things that can harm them. You know, we've seen this more broadly across sports in general. The Turkish Football Association, for example, I believe they're actually called the Turkish Football Federation, have recently revealed that 371 of their football officials have gambling accounts, and over 170 of them are regularly placing bets, including one official who placed over 1,800 bets. You know, clearly gambling is something that will take hold if you legalise it. And this is going to be true of sports officials as much as anyone else in society. One of the things that came to my mind when I saw Adam Silver's comments regarding the allegations that had been made against Billups, Jones and Rogier was he talked about how he was deeply disturbed by the allegations, and there are many people who are going to say that he's being hypocritical given just how much sponsorship money the NBA is now accepting from gambling firms. You cannot watch an NBA game, you cannot watch an NFL game without seeing multiple adverts for gambling companies. There are NBA games now that are being broadcast on the FanDuel Sports Network, where adverts for gambling are very much at the heart of the broadcast. Famously, ESPN did a panel in the wake of those allegations that were made against Billups, Jones and Rogier. And while the panel was criticising gambling and criticising the harm, there was an advert for ESPN Bet in the bottom right hand corner of the picture throughout that broadcast before it was then quietly taken away. I assume because someone in the production truck realised just what a bad look it was to have a panel talking about the harms that come from gambling while advertising your own gambling company on the same screen. This is not a problem that is going to go away. It's not a problem that we are going to be able to tackle unless we also tackle the very intimate and increasingly close relationship that we are seeing between major sports leagues and gambling firms. Gambling is not going to go away. We know that. It's worth far too much money and brings far too much money into the economy. You will have noticed from that chat that I had with Russell 18 months ago just how much money this gambling industry in this country is worth to the UK economy. So it's not going to go away. And so it's certainly not going to go away in the US, where it's going to be worth even more. So we as a society have to do something about this. We have to acknowledge that there is a problem and we need to deal with that problem regardless of how much money it is making for people. And as a part of that, the sports leagues themselves have to acknowledge that, oh yes, we're making all this money, but we cannot talk about integrity of the game whenever someone is found to have bet on a game, but then still be taking money from the sports betting firms. That is not going to result in any issues being solved because, I'm at a loss for words ultimately. Something has to be done, but nothing's going to be done unless people accept that something needs to be done. And it's not me that needs to accept that, it's the people at the heart of the game in those leadership positions, like Adam Silver and like Roger Goodell of the NFL, for example. And with that, that brings an end to this edition of the BCS Podcast. As always, thank you very much for joining me, and I certainly do hope to see you again next time. Bye bye now.
The BCS Podcast is written, produced, edited and hosted by me, Brett Walker.
Thank you to Boban Apostolov and Pixabay for the use of the music and sound effects in this episode.